To be successful at in-play football betting, it's massively important to be making decisions using up-to-date, accurate and genuinely useful data. When I'm watching a game live on TV, I can trust my experience and judgment to see if a goal is likely to be scored and then assess the available odds to see if there's a value bet there. But when I'm not watching the game or the game isn't on TV, I have to rely on tracking apps to tell me how the game is panning out. In-play football trackers range from the truly awful and unusable to the extremely helpful. And unfortunately, I don't think there's one perfect tracker out there which you can use all the time, and a lot of it will come down to your personal preference and what you plan to use it for. But after trying countless trackers over the years, in this video I'm going to break down the 4 trackers which I use and I believe to be the best trackers out there. Many of the features of these trackers somewhat overlap, however each one does something slightly different, which is why I use all 4. And by the end of this video, I'm going to break down a real-life game example to show you the strengths and weaknesses of all these 4 trackers for predicting the chance of a goal to be scored. Okay, let's get on with it, shall we? Starting with number 1, which is SulScore. SulScore will be familiar to many of you, and it's a tracker I've used for a number of years now. SulScore is so popular just because it's so good, and I use this tracker probably more frequently than any of the other trackers on this list. But it does fall short in some key areas which stops me using it all the time. Firstly, with the positives though, I find SulScore's UI to be really nice and straightforward to use. You know exactly where everything is as soon as you're on the website. A list of all the day's games is right in front of you, and you can easily toggle between all the games of the day and the games that are currently in play. On the website version, you can click on any game, and a more detailed view of the game will be displayed on the right-hand side of the screen. This is very useful when you're tracking multiple games at once, because you can quickly toggle through all the games that you're interested in instead of having numerous tabs open with each individual game, which can get very annoying with many of the other trackers out there, which you'll see later in the video. Taking a closer look at the data that you can actually get from SulScore and what I find useful, SulScore is great for viewing the lineups, the live league table, and the in-play statistics, including the XG and the number of big chances. The stats can be split into first half and second half statistics, which is useful for tracking any differences between the 2 halves. To be honest, most of these features are available on all the other trackers. The really useful feature that SulScore offers is the attack momentum graph. This graph allows you to quickly visually determine which team is on top in the game and applying the most pressure. Each of these bars represents 1 minute of game time. The green bar represents the home team pressure and the blue bar represents the away team pressure. The larger the respective bar, the more pressure being applied by the team. So you can get a very quick feeling on how a game is progressing. SulScore isn't perfect though, which stops me using it 100% of the time. There's actually 2 significant critiques I have of SulScore, and they both relate to its best feature, the attack momentum graph. Firstly, a big problem I have is that SulScore don't make it publicly available how they're calculating the attack momentum. All we have to go off is on their website where they say, momentum is calculated using a complex algorithm. We are able to bring you very accurate insight into the course of the game. I somewhat understand the vagary that SulScore have on this topic, because for them, why would they want to give away their secrets? But for us, in our opinion, this is a highly frustrating issue because we're not entirely sure what the height of these bars actually represents. If one bar is twice the size of another bar, does that mean a goal is twice as likely to be scored? Well, I don't know, because SulScore don't tell us how they're calculating this. Also, what would happen if there's a game where 2 teams are relentlessly attacking each other, the defence has gone out the window, it's just an end-to-end basketball match and it looks like a goal is going to be scored at any moment? Well, what happens with the attack momentum graph then? Will it show big peaks on either side of the graph, or will it be that both teams are cancelling each other out and you just get a flat graph, which to be honest looks like the game has been uneventful? And to be honest, I think getting this flat graph is a very likely situation, but we'll get into that more when I break down a real life example later in the video. The second critique I have of SulScore, and specifically on the attack momentum feature, is the type of events that you can see on the timeline of the attack momentum. What I mean by this is that when you click on the graph, the goals and the red cards will appear on the timeline so you can visually see where these events occurred during the game. But as I will show you when I analyse a couple of the later trackers, seeing just red cards and goals is pretty inadequate really for a tracker compared to what you can get from some other trackers. I would love to see SulScore update this timeline to show when corners, shots on target and shots off target all took place. It's great being able to see that there have been this many shots in the second half, but not being able to see whereabouts they happened is highly frustrating. You could in theory scroll down to the shot map, toggle through each and every shot to see what minute they happened in, but who's seriously going to do something as inconvenient as that? It's obviously important to know when shots happened. If most of these shots occurred during a chaotic period early in the second half, not knowing the timing of the shots will mislead you into thinking that the game in the latter stages of the second half has been more eventful than it actually has been, when in reality there may not have been a shot for the last 15 minutes. Trackers 3 and 4 will mitigate some of the issues I've raised about SulScore, but before we get to that we need to cover Tracker 2. And Tracker 2 is FotMob. FotMob is another very popular football tracking app, and it shares many of the same features as SulScore. You get to see all of today's games listed on the home screen, and again you can toggle between the games that are currently in play. The lineups, live up-to-date league table can be tracked as expected, and the in-play stats are more or less the same as what you get with SulScore, including the in-play XG. The one cool feature FotMob has over SulScore is that the shot map can be separated between first half and second half shots, where on SulScore you can only see the shot map for the full game. FotMob also have their own version of attack momentum, simply called Momentum. The momentum graph is cool, I guess, but does have the same problems that SulScore's attack momentum has, in that how the momentum is calculated isn't made publicly available, and the timings of shots and corners, etc. aren't marked on the timeline. And personally, I also find reading the momentum on FotMob more difficult than on SulScore. Maybe this is just through overfamiliarity of using SulScore, but I much prefer the bar chart approach that SulScore offer for momentum, rather than this continuous line graph thing which FotMob use. You may sense in my voice that I don't like FotMob as much as I like SulScore, and to some extent that is true. I find navigating the site to be a bit clunkier, and the little things get annoying very quickly. For example, if you want to track multiple games at once, you can't just click through each game in the way that you can on SulScore, because on FotMob, each time you click on a game, it'll take you onto a separate web page, which results in having to have multiple games open in different tabs, which is highly inconvenient. So despite all of these concerns, there is a reason which FotMob makes it into my top 4 football trackers, and that is the ability to track games when you're out and about and not at home. Especially on weekends when I can be trading games from like 10 AM up until the early hours of the following morning. It's inconceivable to just sit at home in front of the laptop and TV all game, watching, tracking, betting on football. As much as I'd like to do that, sometimes even I have to go outdoors. And in my opinion, FotMob is the unquestionable king at tracking football games when you're not at home, when you're out and about and you don't have access to your computer. FotMob feels like it's almost designed to be used on mobile and for the ability to track games when you're not at home. And this won't apply to most people, but I recently got an Apple Watch, and FotMob works seamlessly with the watch to allow me to get notifications for the games I'm tracking, and even allows me to view the momentum and the stats for a game with just a glance at my wrist without needing to keep taking my phone out of my pocket time and time again throughout the day. And I only need to take my phone out to open Betfair if a betting opportunity arises. Of course, I'm aware that most people don't have Apple Watches, but even just on mobile, the notification feature for tracking games when you're not at home, I think it is the best option out there. I like that you can customize the notifications you want to get from a game, so you're only getting notified on the things that are important to you. And yeah, that's FotMob really. What more is there to say about FotMob? It's brilliant in some ways, but it's also limited in some other key ways. But when you're out and about and you're tracking games, it is the best option available in my opinion. So now it's time to move on to Tracker 3, and this is where we get into a bit more of an advanced tracker. Tracker 3 mitigate some of the issues I have with FotMob and SulScore's attack momentum, and that tracker is called PackBall. I doubt many of you will have heard of PackBall, but after watching this, I think a lot of you will start to use this tracker because it is just so damn useful. The big upside from using PackBall is the momentum feature. Unlike SulScore and FotMob, where all you can see is momentum and goals, with PackBall you can see when corners happen. You can also see shots off target, marked by a circle with a cross, and shots on target, marked by a circle with a tick. Before getting too far ahead of myself, I should tell you that to unlock all the features of PackBall, you have to pay for a premium membership. I should disclose that I don't pay for a premium membership. I just use the free version, and I'm not an affiliate for this website, so I don't care whether you go and pay for the premium membership or not. I just thought I'd be clear that to unlock all the features on this, you do have to pay for the premium version. You do get to see this graph in the free version though, which is why I don't pay for the premium version. Because to me, this graph showing the key events in the game is the most important feature. But again, to caveat that, if you view too many games in one day, PackBall will limit you and say you can't view any more games. I tested this over several days and it seemed to happen after so many different games, and then sometimes that happened. Like one day I viewed like 50 games in one day and I didn't get a notification to say that I'd viewed too many games. But occasionally it'll come up saying you've reached the number of games that you can view in a day, so keep that in mind. But that's the reason why Tracker 4 is on this list, because you get all or most of the same features that you can get from PackBall, but there is no limit with Tracker 4. It is completely free to use. But we'll get to that shortly. Back to PackBall now, what you can get with it. I think this pressure tracker is truly brilliant because unlike SulScore or FotMob, you really have the context for the pressure. You can see a team rack up lots of shots and corners before scoring a goal. The graph itself can be a bit difficult to read in my opinion. With SulScore, I think you can instantly see if one team is dominating the other. But on PackBall, it feels a little bit like sometimes you have to really look and concentrate on the figure to figure out, what is going on here. But you can filter the graph to show you just the timings of the shots or the corners or the dangerous attacks to make things easier to visualize. Like the other trackers, you can see the lineups and the statistics, but you don't get to see the in-play XG or big chances stats. So you would have to use another app alongside PackBall if you wanted to keep up to date with those stats. I do occasionally get tempted to pay for the premium version because it does look like you get some cool features. For example, numerical values for team pressure, which I'm showing you on screen how they calculate, which is much better than SulScore and FotMob, who don't tell you what they're doing to calculate pressure and things. These values can be viewed for the full game or for the last 10 minutes, which is quite important in my opinion. For me, these values are a lot because I haven't paid, but the advantage of having these compared to just the bars on the graph is obvious really. You could easily build yourself some form of model and a betting strategy based on calculating the number of goals after the pressure has exceeded a certain value, for example. How useful would that be? I'm not too sure. Obviously, I've not been convinced enough myself to invest in the premium features. I just think that the free version with the graph is the most important thing and all you really need. In terms of criticisms of PackBall, other than the fact that it is a paid service, unlike these other trackers, I think the biggest concern, which is actually a bigger concern than it initially may seem, is that there doesn't seem to be an ability to search for an individual game. Unless I am being a complete moron, I can't find anywhere on the website to search for games. Instead, I have to find my game by scrolling down this big long list of all the games of the day, or go into the leagues, find the league the game is in, and then find the game that way. It might sound like only a minor concern, but when you're tracking 5 or 10 games or more at once, this becomes an absolute nightmare. So yeah, PackBall, it's brilliant for the attack momentum graph, however it is limited in a couple of other ways, especially the fact that you can sometimes only view a certain number of games in one day. But luckily for you, Tracker 4 will mitigate those issues because there are no limits on the number of games you can view. For Tracker 4, we have WhoScored. WhoScored's main page is a familiar feel to all these other football trackers, with just a long list of all the games on that day, which can be filtered to just the games that are currently in play. And then from there, you can press this little bar chart button and the match center for the game will launch. I did just complain about PackBall's attack momentum being a little bit more difficult to read than SulScore, but if you think that was bad, take a look at this monstrosity on WhoScored. WhoScored definitely won't win prizes for its visuals, you can see the symbols everywhere, but it does win prizes with me for its functionality. Honestly, this rating timeline thing, which is the first thing that pops up, I have absolutely no idea what it is or what it means. All I tend to be interested in on WhoScored is the shots and the corners tab. If you click on one of these tabs, the timeline will update to show you what you're interested in. In this case, I've selected shots. The goals and the cards and the subs will remain in the top and bottom bar for the home and away team respectively, but the middle bar will update depending on which tab you select. So as I've selected shots, we can see that the middle bar time of every shot has been marked by a little orange or a little blue bar, depending on if it was a home shot or an away shot. And if we press show more, we can select to view either shots on or off target. The feature that I find awesome from WhoScored is that we can actually drag this little bar to different parts in the game to see stats for just that period of the game. For example, if a game is in the 80th minute and you want to see how many shots there has been since the 70th minute, you can drag this little bar up here all the way up to the 70th minute and see how many shots there's been on and off target in the last 10 minutes, which of course is a really useful feature. In terms of what else you can get from WhoScored, you can go to what they call the chalkboard and get a more detailed breakdown of key in-game events such as the types of shots, if that's something that you're interested in. The couple of negatives I have about WhoScored is that there isn't any live XG tracking for the game that you're interested in, and there isn't any like momentum tracking graph which the other three trackers have. All I tend to find WhoScored useful for is seeing where the shots and the corners were taken in the game. It's very similar to PackBall. It's like a slightly worse version in my opinion, but it is completely free to use. Now that I have broken down the 4 trackers, I'm going to break down a real life game example to show you how I personally use these trackers to identify if a goal is likely to be scored. And the game that I'm using to illustrate the strengths and weaknesses of each of these trackers is the Premier League game between Nottingham Forest and West Ham, which was on the 12th of November. I think this game is sort of a perfect game to illustrate the strengths and weaknesses of all these trackers. West Ham started this game at odds of 1.82, and there's 2 key areas in this game which I want to highlight, and they are the first 50 minutes of the second half before a goal was scored, and then the second part of the game I want to highlight is like the last 10 to 15 minutes of the game before the final goal was scored in the game. The reason that I picked this game was that I was watching this game live on TV, so I had a very good idea of what was actually happening in the game, and I thought these 2 goals that I'm going to highlight were quite easy to predict in all honesty. So the question becomes, which of these trackers represented the game most accurately so that you could make betting decisions if you was tracking this game and it wasn't on TV or you wasn't watching the game? To add a little bit of context, the game was 1-1 at half time after Nottingham Forest had scored a 44th minute equaliser. If you're watching the game live on TV, at the start of the second half it became very obvious to me and to people watching that a goal was very likely to be scored, as both teams were relentlessly attacking each other. It was end-to-end, there was transitions, defending had gone out the window, it was just you have a shot, you have a shot, you have an attack, you have an attack, and there's only so long that can go on for before on average a goal is likely to be scored. To caveat, of course, that doesn't mean a goal definitely will be scored, and a lot of this also depends on the odds you can bet on for a goal to be scored, but that's a topic for another video. So if we watched on TV, I thought I was able to identify that there was value in backing over 2.5 goals, but assuming that I wasn't watching this on TV, which of these 4 trackers would have given the best accurate portrayal of how the game was panning out to help me find this value bet? To work this out, let's take a look at SulScore's, FotMob's, PackBall's and WhoScored's features to figure out which tracker was the most accurate. I think looking at SulScore, situations like this are not very good with SulScore. SulScore excels in a particular game setup, which I'll show you after I've talked about this example. But when looking at this attack momentum graph during this period of the game, which was end-to-end chaos, it comes across as not much was really happening in the game, as none of the attack momentum bars for either team are particularly tall. This makes complete sense, because if no team has defensive control and no team is in the ascendancy, then why would the attack momentum graph show anything other than this? But for us, this is not very helpful for predicting if a goal is likely to be scored. It isn't that the attack momentum is inaccurate, it's just that this just isn't useful. You can't look at this and think, yes, a goal looks like it's going to be scored. There's nothing you can really see on this relatively flat graph. The FotMob momentum chart is similar to SulScore, except here where FotMob reckon Forest had a stronger period of momentum than SulScore, and that really is the issue with both of these trackers. Without having the context of what's going on in the game, it's very difficult to interpret these charts in end-to-end games like this. But if we now go to look at both PackBall and WhoScored, we see a clearer picture of how the game was progressing. This is visually displayed better on PackBall, but you can get the same information from WhoScored. Before the goal was scored, we saw that West Ham had 2 corners and 5 shots, and Forest had 3 shots. You of course would be able to see these second half stats from SulScore, but not whereabouts they occurred, which is problematic, as it's definitely possible to have all 5 shots or most of the 5 shots in just the space of one attack. But through using PackBall or WhoScored, we can see how the shots were spread out. Twice for West Ham and once for Nottingham Forest, there were 2 shots during the same attack, but we can also see that there were 5 distinct attacks across both teams which led to a shot prior to this second goal being scored. And this is much more useful for predicting if a goal is likely to be scored rather than just looking at the outright stats, in my opinion. Unfortunately, what I find with all 4 of these trackers across the board is that none of them are very good at showing how dangerous attacks are which don't lead to shots directly. Watching the game live, I could see all the transitions and the turnovers and the dangerous half chances that both teams were making but were just falling short on the final pass or something, which makes it ever more likely that a goal is going to be scored. But none of these trackers seem to factor that in as well as when an actual shot happens in the game. Yes, you can on PackBall filter the momentum graph to show dangerous attacks, which I guess is useful, but there's no real substitute for watching a game live where you can factor in all of the little pieces of information that you can pick up on when you're watching the game. Anyways, to summarise goals like this where it's end-to-end chaos, I think that the traditional momentum trackers, SulScore and FotMob, they really struggle in games like this at identifying the likelihood of a goal being scored. But I would say that PackBall and WhoScored come into their own here, and this is where they really excel at identifying games where a goal is likely to be scored, where it could go to either team. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean SulScore and FotMob are completely useless, because I think the final goal in this game shows the real use of SulScore and FotMob and the attack momentum feature in general. So back to the game now. After this end-to-end period in the game, which I've been talking about, Nottingham Forest took the lead through a well-taken Anthony Elanga goal, but more or less straight from kickoff, West Ham equalised through Jarrod Bowen, and at that point the game immediately changed. Instead of being this frantic end-to-end type basketball game, the approach of Nottingham Forest changed quite significantly, where they now appeared to be happy to take the draw away at a difficult place like West Ham. The dynamics completely changed, where West Ham were taking the initiative in the game and applying a lot of pressure to Forest, who were no longer really attacking. And through watching the game live on TV, it was getting more and more apparent to me watching that West Ham were going to score a late goal in this game, as the pressure was just getting so much and Forest were really struggling to hang in there. So now let's look at the trackers. If I wasn't watching this game on TV, which of these trackers would have provided the clearest picture of what was happening during the game? Through watching on TV, I could see that after the equalising goal to 2-2, there was a period of sort of slow building pressure by West Ham before an acceleration of pressure in the final 10 minutes, where West Ham were building more and more pressure and eventually scored the goal. And then we look at the trackers, I think SulScore was really excellent in showing this in the attack momentum graph. You can see quite clearly this slow build-up of pressure before this period of more intense pressure before the eventual goal was scored. FotMob was also decent at showing the intense period of pressure before the West Ham winner, but in my opinion was not as good at showing this period in the game. FotMob's momentum chart made this period of the game appear much more even than it actually was. I think SulScore is just the king here in the quick visual assessment of a game when one team is really on top of the other team. And you see this all the time really. I'll put another example here between the Real Madrid and Napoli game in the Champions League. You can see when Real Madrid really upped the tempo in the game before getting the goal. I still think that just using SulScore on its own in games like this, where there's one team really on top, is insufficient, because when you combine SulScore with PackBall or WhoScored, it's still very useful in periods like this, as it allows you to contextualise what's causing these bars to be so high. Like in this West Ham game, we can see that there were 4 corners and 3 shots on target from the 80th minute up until the 88th minute before the eventual goal was scored. I know it's been quite a long video, but I'd say the most important thing to take away from this is that not one of these trackers is perfect. It's best to use a bit of a combination of a couple of these or more to get the best picture of how a game is panning out as possible. I won't be surprised in the future if a giant like FotMob or SulScore adds these shots and corners icons type thing to the attack momentum graphs. I don't see why they haven't done it already, as they are tracking this data. I just don't get why they put it in a more visual way to see. I think in an ideal world, my perfect tracker would show similar pressure bars as SulScore. I think they're quite good, but the corners would be marked on the graph, and instead of shots being marked with ticks or crosses like PackBall, depending on if the shot was on or off target, there would instead be a little number in a circle, which would represent the XG of the shot. And if the shot chance, whatever, was classed as a big chance, that circle would be red or highlighted in some other way to make it stand out. But the dream of having a tracker like that is not here at the moment, so for now, I have to compromise with the trackers that we've got. I'd be very interested to know which trackers that you use, and if there's any other trackers that aren't in this video which you also use, which you think are better than these, leave those down below, and I'm sure we would all appreciate that. Thank you for watching this video, which has been brought to you by the people supporting me on Patreon, who are appearing on the screen now. If you'd like to learn more about the exclusive content you can get if you support me on Patreon, you can check me out in the link below. And yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.